Welcome to Target Market Insights, the multifamily and marketing podcast. Each week, John Kasman interviews multifamily and marketing experts to teach you how to find the best places to invest, attract investors, and grow your portfolio. You are listening to Target Market Insights with your host, John Kasman.
Welcome to Target Market Insights. I'm your host, John Kasman, and I want to thank you for joining us for another great episode. Now, if you're enjoying the show, do me a quick favor. Leave us that 5-star rating and review, and don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. Now, today we're going to be talking to Laurence Jakelow. Laurence Jakelow is the co-founder of Avail, an all-in-one software solution designed for do-it-yourself landlords, and it's used by more than 600,000 landlords and tenants across the United States. Now, Laurence himself is a real estate investor and launched Avail after spending years in data analytics as a consultant in the industry. Let's welcome to the show, Laurence Jakelow.
Great. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Laurence, I briefly went over your bio. Why don't you take a minute and give us a little bit more context of who you are?
Sure. Well, I thought what you did was great. So I started off in data analytics at a consulting house, basically going from client to client, looking at their processes, trying to help them figure out where things are broken through the lens of data. Used that, left there, joined Goldman Sachs. I was there for just over 2 years, doing kind of the same thing, but just for Goldman, taking the data, supporting their hedge funds and alternative investments, trying to figure out how to make them more money. And while I was there, I started buying some rental properties here where I live in Chicago. So bought my first 3-unit multifamily from a friend of mine who worked with me. He was moving and wanted to sell it. So got it off market, which best way to enter into real estate is if you can get it off market. So that was luck. And then, as I was managing that property, realized, look, it's really hard to have a full-time job and be a part-time landlord at the same time. And so I started looking for software, didn't find anything. I had a friend who was doing the same thing, looking for software for his 2 single-family homes. And we realized, nobody makes software for landlords of our size. We're kind of not served, really. At that time, I had 3 units. I have 6 now, but then I had 3. And no one wants a 3-unit landlord. We're not that profitable. So we just felt underappreciated. And then we decided to take a huge leap and quit our jobs and went out to build software for landlords like ourselves. And so that's what we did. Took a long time, a lot of effort.
Yeah, Laurence, that's amazing, especially the leap you took there. When you talk about software, I mean, for 3 units at the time, many people probably either, did it down and dirty, maybe use Excel. I guess, what kind of software solutions were you seeking? What specifically were you looking for, and what were you trying to do? I mean, what solutions did you have in place that you felt just didn't quite meet your needs?
Yeah, I was one of those using Excel. It was crazy, actually. I would go into Excel, I would merge cells, I'd paint them, I'd make them look pretty, and I'd print it out, and that would be my rental application. And I'd hand it to a tenant, and they'd fill it out, and then I'd take this piece of paper, and I'd keep it. And that could get lost or whatever could happen to it. It's got their social security number on it. Seems kind of risky. And then because I had that, I didn't actually know that I should be, trying to get a credit report or eviction check. I just wasn't doing those things. So that was a huge kind of wake up for me. And that's what we first started out looking for, was what kind of tools could we use to just screen tenants and not have to take pieces of paper with super sensitive information on them. That was where it started. I think as well, like at that time I was posting listings on Craigslist and having to log into Craigslist every single day to try to get your listing back to the top. Craigslist is one of those where it just keeps pushing to the bottom based on time, and you go back, you put it at the top. And then I wasn't getting very good quality leads from Craigslist. There was a lot of spam happening, a lot of solicitation, but not a lot of real interest. And so one of those first problems that we tried to solve as well was, how do you find qualified leads, and where do you want to go? And Zillow was out there, Trulia, HotPads, apartments.com, rent.com, all these places that tenants are going and looking for tenants. And the last thing I wanted to do was have to make a listing on 5 websites and then manage those leads on 5 different websites, and then every day log into 5 websites and see how they were doing. So what we did is we allowed ourselves, we built the software to essentially create the listing with Avail, and we'll put it automatically on all those websites. And then all the leads will just flow into Avail so that you have one central place to to do that. So that saved a ton of time. And those two features were kind of the first ones we did, listing syndication and tenant screening, and just totally changed how I manage my rentals.
No, I mean, those are things that every landlord, especially starting out, if you're self-managing your assets, these are the steps, right? I mean, you have a vacancy, you got to make sure the unit's, ready to show, and then you list it. So you got to figure out where you're listing it. You have to be able to screen tenants and residents. And then you have to go through, obviously, the process of getting the application, getting them in. And those are just the steps. I mean, those are the blocking and tackling steps of being a landlord owner, or being a property owner, being a landlord, however you want to phrase it. A lot of the things that you mentioned, we certainly face as well, especially when we had our smaller portfolio in Chicago, when it comes to, those applications and getting everything in paper. And we had to make sure we shredded documents, right? And made sure that we protected the information that we did have on file and all those different things. Help me understand timing wise, because when did you guys start this platform?
Yeah, so the timing is a little wonky. We left our jobs middle of 2012, and
Okay.
we left with nothing but an idea on a napkin. And maybe that's overselling it, because I don't even know that we had a napkin. And we tried to find some engineers to help us build it, and obviously we didn't have the money to pay for that, and we couldn't really raise money. We had no credibility. Essentially, we're first-time entrepreneurs, so. We ended up having to roll up our sleeves and taught ourselves to code, and then spent the first 2 years building the app ourselves, which is a lot longer than it would take like real engineers. You could probably do it in 6 months, but we were new. So we built essentially everything from scratch. I think I wrote the first 500,000 lines of code myself. So then, you go from 2012, it's now kind of middle of 2014, we started trying to market the product that we had built. And we've just been living off ramen noodles, the classic cliche since then. And we started seeing people start using it and enjoying it, and learned more about them. And then started thinking about, how do you market to do-it-yourself landlords? Because part of the problem, and I recognize it with myself, is I never tell people I'm a landlord unless I'm on some sort of podcast like this. That's not how I identify myself. I'm a father of two, and I like sci-fi, and that's how I identify myself. So how do you go about trying to find landlords is really hard. And so we spent a good amount of time thinking about that. And now we just rely on educational content and inbound content marketing strategies that work. We look at it as a core feature, just try to put out really solid educational content, teach landlords about a process, what they should do, what they shouldn't do, which was foundational for us.
No, I love it. And I definitely want to come back to some of the inbound marketing strategies that you're employing right now. But first, let's go back to 2012. So you quit your job. It takes you 2 years to kind of really develop this app before you can get in front of people. Why quit? I mean, why not work and develop the app part-time, use some of maybe your salary income to pay a part-time engineer or something like that? Why did you believe in the idea so much that you left your job at Goldman Sachs, which I know Goldman Sachs pays pretty well. They don't, so that's probably a pretty good salary that you walked away from. Chicago's not a cheap place to stay. So you walked away from all that to develop the app. I'm trying to understand, what was your rationale in making such a big commitment to this as a first-time entrepreneur?
Yeah, I mean, the reasoning is totally rational. No one in their right mind just bails on a good, solid job to do something that's 100% risk and 99% likely to fail. I think for me personally, it was an emotional thing. I didn't want to have to be in the rat race for the rest of my life. Goldman had at that time 33,000 employees. I'm but one, and you can feel it. You feel like a cog in the wheel. You just don't feel like you're adding value. You don't feel like you're changing society. I had a personal pain with my rental properties. My friends shared that pain. I felt like in the market, there's a huge problem with transparency around rentals. Landlords sometimes take advantage of tenants. Tenants not knowing their rights, landlords not knowing their rights either. We used to do like a Google search for landlords are, and then you look at what Google autocomplete shows. It's crazy. And then you do the same thing with tenants, and you see how bad it is. So you're like, landlords are greedy, landlords are scumbags. You see tenants are lazy, tenants are this. And part of it for me was, if I want to go build something, I want to build something that corrects it, brings transparency to both sides, brings efficiency, maybe changes how people think about doing things. And that was exciting and motivating for me. So there's no rationalization necessarily other than like, I wanted to get out of the rat race and do something meaningful.
I think it's great hearing you talk about that, because most people are very logical, and, being in data analytics and working at Goldman, you spit out, and I know you just threw out the 99% likely to fail and whatever, but I'm sure you understood that, hey, there's high risk and high probability that this will not work out. So for you to take that leap, it means that it wasn't something that was analytical. It was not an analytical decision. It was an emotional decision. And I think as human beings, we don't give that enough credit, and I went through a similar situation where we're building our business, and, we're certainly making great progress, but I didn't replace my income. It wasn't like, hey, there's not gonna be no impact on my lifestyle. Right. But it got to the point where, and I think what I heard you say was, you felt like a cog in the wheel. You didn't feel like the work you were doing was making a real impact on society. And most of us are really focused on our purpose. There's certainly people who get into real estate to make money. And it's a great way to do that. But I think for folks who are looking to escape the rat race, escape the 9 to 5, it's not so much a financial decision as much as it is a fulfillment decision, and making sure that our life has purpose, that we make an impact on the people we love, the communities we love. And, for you recognizing that as a landlord yourself, there are other landlords who are facing these challenges, but not just that side of the equation, but the other side, the residents who weren't getting the clarity. And you don't hear that very often. I mean, most people certainly know the landlords are the ones who are going to pay for it from a business standpoint. So let's build something they want. It sounds like you focused on both sides of those equations to make sure that there was a transparent transaction that was taking place. I want to understand a little bit more about, really the way you created that transparency, not to go too deep into the underworkings of the platform, but there is a lot of data that gets, moved back and forth, and I know that there's probably some other applications and platforms that you may consider competitors, but as far as background checks, as far as posting the listing to different platforms and automating that process. And I even know that you have some tenant request forms and things like that in there. I mean, are you pulling from different databases? I mean, I imagine there's a lot of interconnectivity to be able to tap into, whether it be Experian or TransUnion or some of these different platforms, to create this back-end system that does have this transparency. And how are you kind of protecting people and their data when you're going through and kind of, tapping into some of the most sensitive things of people's lives?
Yeah, great question, or questions in there. I think that I guess I'll start with kind of the first part that you mentioned around the focus that we had on tenants and why, and then I'll talk about the data. And it's actually a crazy amount of personal information that we end up getting. As far as tenants, like one of the and maybe I'm different, but I tend not to believe so. I feel like a lot of landlords are like this, where you view your tenants as customers in a way, or friends, and you feel obligated to give them a high quality of life. I know for both buildings, they're both 3-unit buildings. Both times when we bought them, like one of the first things we do, it has basically zero ROI, but the first things we did were replace the windows. They were old, they were drafty. And as far as like how it feels when you're in the apartment, it feels so much better having good windows. You can feel it as you walk in, and you have a higher sense of quality of living when you have that. And so we've done that both times. We always keep it really nice. We do a lot of preventive maintenance ourselves in our properties. And then we take those lessons and we encourage our customers, our landlords who use Avail, to do the same thing. Kind of create that business mindset where your tenants are your customers. And if you think about it that way, you'll tend to do the right thing by them. I think by now everyone knows customers are key to your business and you're going to treat them fairly. And then where it comes to personal information, what Avail is doing is enabling tenants to own their data. So if you're doing this offline, or if you're doing it with a competitor who doesn't think that way, then the landlord's getting all of this information. And how do you protect that? You relinquish control over the data you provide them. And what we're doing is we allow tenants to choose what information they share, when to take it back, when to turn it off. A lot of it we actually don't share at all. So we don't share social security numbers with the landlords ever. Those are all hidden. And in fact, we don't save social security numbers in our own database either. We use those as a pass through with the credit bureaus to pull credit information, and then we wipe it immediately. So you have to give some of the control of the data back to the tenant, and that's how we produce some of that transparency and data security and make them feel like they're part of the equation and not kind of the money side only. So we have a lot of emphasis there. I don't know if that answered everything you had in there.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit at it, right? And when we talk about privacy, what I heard you say was one of the first things we do is we don't share all the private information with the owner because they don't necessarily need your social security number. What they need to do is verify you are who you say you are, your credit history, and all those other factors. They don't necessarily need to know your exact credit number, or your social security number. So by shielding that provides some safety, but then also erasing that and not holding that and storing that in your system. And I know a lot of people are very concerned with their data right now, and we keep reading about breaches, happening very frequently. Target or whatever. I don't want to just call them out, but different large stores and companies that we know have encryption software and have the highest level of technology when it comes to protecting their data. They're still being breached. So trying to understand ways to remove that risk of exposure helps. And I certainly had a resident. No, this was a few years back, but I mean, they asked when they were filling out the application, like, hey, what do you do with that? And I was using a paper application back then. And they asked, hey, what happens to this piece of paper once I give it to you? And, I think people were certainly waking up to that. And, as you've progressed since 2012, 2014 to present day, there's certainly, I think more of an appetite for the technology to do these kind of things versus back then. How have you seen that dynamic change? I think today there are probably more players in the space. Some of the problems you were solving for when you launched, there are other platforms, like people aren't really using Craigslist anymore. And there's certainly Avail and these other platforms give the ability to make one posting and blast it out to 20 different websites. How have you seen kind of the landscape and the options for both landlords and tenants shift over the last 6 or so years?
Yeah, well, I mean, real estate is ripe for technology to come and take over and fix a lot of the problems that exist around security or efficiencies. I think we're seeing a lot happen since we launched. And everyone's got kind of their own niche or their target and what they're doing. You mentioned Avail, which personally I think their software is great. The thing with them is they just don't target our customers. I still feel like our kind of customers are neglected. And we really target landlords with 9 or fewer units. So that might be 3 unit buildings. They're really the smaller landlord. And Avail is targeting someone with 200 or more units. And they're designing it and building their software that's going to be amazing for someone with 200 units. And for us, we focused on ordinary people with 1, 2, 3 units. And what they need is different. They need a simple process that they can understand. They need education. They need something to help them tell them what to do, step 1 through 10. And in some ways, hopefully just automated for them so they don't have to carry that mental burden. And that's, I think, where we shine and are different in that ways. We incorporate the process and education into what we do. And certainly we see competitors emerge now trying to emulate what we do. And I think I see one glowing mistake that they all make. They take gobs of money from venture capitalists and they bring on a 100-person team, 50, 100-person team day one. And they just burn through that cash in that first year without ever understanding the customer. And they may build something that just doesn't make any sense. They're out of money and they go away. So I see a lot of competitors coming in, burning out and going away almost within like a 6-month, 12-month period. And we just see that happening on rotation. It's almost like clockwork. Someone will email us being like, hey, have you heard of so-and-so? And we'll be like, no. And then 6 months later, they're gone.
Yeah. That's the challenge, right? With the startups, especially when we talk about technology, it's very quick to run through that capital to be outdated. And that's definitely one of the watch outs. You talked about inbound marketing, and I definitely want to come back on that because we are big on education. I mean, this whole podcast, that's what this is, right? I mean, we're talking to our listeners, we're educating them, we're trying to give them the resources that they need. And ultimately we expect to get some value on the back end from a small number of folks who are listening. And that's really what all content marketing or inbound marketing techniques are for. You've grown to 600,000 users, which I think is incredible for someone who, didn't have a coding background and quit his job cold turkey to build this. Let's talk about some of those tactics and strategies that you've employed to grow your current database, right? So inbound marketing, can you just give a little bit more context of what inbound marketing is from your perspective and some of the techniques and strategies you've used to really build that kind of landlord database?
Yeah, sure. So, I'll start with traditional marketing or outbound marketing is you have a sales team, they have a phone number, and they just call and they hope to sell you based on the value of the business, based on the value to that business, and you hope to get them that way. But what we realized with our customers, one, there's no phone book that has them listed. So an outbound technique just isn't possible because they're not listed anywhere. And so then you have to start thinking about how do I get them to come to me instead and find Avail. And you have to do that by delivering them value up front. Rather than trying to explain what that value is, you have to deliver value. And oftentimes that's in the form of education, which is what we do. And we were seeing other companies do content and inbound marketing too. And what was frustrating for me when we started doing this in 2012 was reading other people's content. You would do a Google search for something like how to screen a tenant. And you could tell what they were doing. They were just trying to rank for a keyword. They weren't trying to add value. And you'd see it's like a 500-word keyword stuffed article that really adds nothing. And we wanted to flip that and change that. And I think a lot of people do that now, but in 2012 they didn't. And we wanted to produce like 2,000 to 5,000 word, highly organized value add content. We have stuff in it that you can take and use. So if we were talking about a rental application, there'd be a PDF you could download and use that day. Or if we were talking about how do you know if you should buy this rental property, we would give an Excel sheet that has all the formulas and you'd plug them in and it would basically give you, here's your internal rate of return, your cash on cash, the gross rent multiplier on the property, all the stuff that's actually value add. And so we set out and we did, hundreds of guides that would give real value in the form of education and then tools that they could take away. And what we found is that, one, we felt good about ourselves when we did that. And we could see that traffic was increasing and word of mouth was increasing. And then what we saw in return was that people would trust us. They would come back to the website and then they would sign up for the services and give it a try. And when you do that enough and you just keep thinking about value first, it tends to work.
No, I love that, man. I really love that. I was sitting here just taking notes, and a couple things I want to replay for our listeners, and I want to extract it to a higher level to make sure people understand that this is just kind of a great marketing strategy. It's not, you used it for your needs, but from a marketing standpoint, this is applicable across, industries. So first and foremost, delivering value upfront, not so much, what your competitors are doing with just stuffing for keywords and trying to make sure you put landlord, 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 and just writing landlord every 10 seconds, but really making sure the content itself was valuable. And I want to make sure you understood the power tip that Laurence just gave. When you're creating content and you're trying to make sure you're delivering value, focus on the problem the person is trying to solve. And I'll kind of use your example and I'll kind of expand on it a little bit. If someone is Googling for how to screen tenants, what he mentioned was, he didn't say this, but this is the kind of thing you would do, is you would have an article and you would obviously answer the question on how to screen tenants, but you might have a tenant screening checklist available for download or something that actually helps them solve the problem. Because their problem is not, hey, just give me a list of tips. They're trying to figure out how to screen tenants, right? So help them figure out how to screen tenants. You just writing tenant screening a bunch of times doesn't help them solve the problem. So having a checklist, on the other hand, that has a proven strategies of here's a great process to screen tenants, that's going to solve a problem. So whatever your industry is, whatever you're looking to do, a powerful, powerful tip is to actually focus on the problem the customer, or in this case, the reader, is searching for, and make sure your educational content is focused and geared towards solving that problem. If you really want to take it to the next level and rise above your competition, give them a download that is a solution to that problem. That's just a powerful, powerful tip that I don't know if enough people understand, because everyone likes to say, hey, join my newsletter. And you come to the website and it's, hey, join my newsletter. It's like, why? Why would I join your newsletter? Why do I want just another email? And you've given people specific solutions that help them, and you're continuing to foster a community for these newer landlord owners. And it sounds like you said that your audience is kind of 9 units or less. So many of them are probably first-time landlords as well. So there's a lot of learnings on what it takes to be a first-time landlord. So they're looking to consume content because nobody wants to make a mistake. So really understanding that audience is a great way to build. So you've obviously have focused a lot of effort there, outside of just kind of creating blog posts and creating the downloadable content. What are some other inbound marketing things that you're working on right now?
Yeah, totally. So we also try to do a lot of video stuff. So I guess it also falls under the vein of content, but you have to realize YouTube and things like that are a search engine as well. YouTube is actually the second largest search engine. So you want to try to have content out there. And that's probably where we're weaker than I'd like to be at this point. And just some people learn by reading, some people learn by listening, some people learn by seeing. So you kind of have to go about all those places. And then I think a critical component is just understanding the customer and listening to them. And if that's through content, then the thing is understand their question. The example you gave with how do you screen a tenant? I used to see a lot of people answer that with why tenant screening is important, or what is tenant screening, and then never actually get to the how to screen tenants. And those are different. Like how you give that answer, it really depends on what they actually asked. And I feel like a lot of people just didn't listen. And so you have to listen. Outside of that, if you can get in a room with a customer and witness their problems firsthand, that's huge. That's not scalable and that's not inbound marketing, but the amount of learning you get from that is astronomical. We did that early on. We would try to do over the shoulder watching stuff. So we would go to a landlord's house, and while they signed a lease that they had in paper, and we just sit there and look and be like, this is interesting. And then we would try to build things that helped make it easier and fix the problems that they had rather than what we thought they had. And so a lot of it comes down to, are you building the right product for their needs? And then we started thinking about how can you leverage the product to then grow. So once you've got initial customers, there's a concept that we really lean on heavily now. I think it's called product-led growth. Some people call it product-first marketing. So for instance, if a landlord is using our service to collect rent online, the tenant will be paying their rent all year. We might help that tenant improve their credit score because we'll report all their credit payments to the credit bureau, and then they'll see a credit score improvement. But that tenant's going to love that. And when that tenant's lease expires, that tenant's going to leave that landlord and go to a new landlord. And how do you get that tenant to then bring on their next landlord? And so there's opportunity through product to then also grow. And we consider that to be inbound marketing in a way as well, because you'd hope that through that tenant that they would bring on their next landlord or just keep paying their next landlord. And so when you can start to think about how do you leverage the product to do those kinds of things, you start finding that growth happens a lot faster as well.
No, that's awesome. Appreciate that insight and sharing that. Let's talk a little bit more about some of the challenges that these newer owners are facing, or just those folks who kind of have 9 units or less. What are some of the top challenges that these individuals are looking for?
Yeah, well, I think they just make a lot of mistakes. I think in terms of listings, there's a lot of fair housing violations. You might see in someone's, and they mean well. They've got a really nice, let's say they got a really nice single family home with a big yard. They might put in the listings that says something perfect for families. And that's actually a violation. You can get in trouble for that. There was a case 10, 15 years ago where a leasing agent only showed units on the first floor with easy access to folks who had some sort of physical disability. And she only showed units in the back where the yards were away from the traffic to people who had families because it was safer. And that's actually illegal. Even though she meant well, she lost her job and all those things. So I think a big part of it is making sure that they're obeying the laws. And then that flows through the entire process. Here in Chicago, you're no longer allowed to get credit and background and eviction check stuff until you validate that they have the financials to pay. And if you do all those at the same time, you're actually in violation now of Chicago laws. And then that extends into the leasing as well. So there's like 12 disclosures you're supposed to provide in Chicago. Nationwide, every city has something you're supposed to do in addition to the lease. Some things you can't write in the lease, some things you can. And so just landlords make mistakes all the way through, legal mistakes. And like if you have something, anything, Avail or any kind of software that's doing this for you, it really removes those mistakes. You don't have to have the headspace for it. On leases, we find a lot of landlords will try to pay a lawyer $500 to make a lease. And those lawyers don't really know the laws either. It's crazy. They'll go to they'll go to a lawyer who writes wills, and this lawyer will be like, sure, $500, I'll make a lease for you. But they have no concept of residential landlord tenant ordinances, and they pay $500 for a lease that they could have gotten for free from something like us. Or worse, they'll go to Staples and buy the $3 lease from Staples. And that in almost every city is going to get you into trouble. We see mistakes on payments as well. Landlords might collect a security deposit but not give a receipt. And depending where you are, if you don't give a receipt, you could lose 3 times the security deposit in a lawsuit. Or if you don't give interest on the security deposit, you could lose 3 times that deposit. And so there's all of these things all along the way that they make mistakes on. Whereas if you're a large landlord, 1,000+ units, you've already made all of these mistakes. Or you have a full team who's licensed to do this and already knows these things. And so, if you got 2 units, you're not going to go get a license. So how do you learn these things? You have to have someone help you.
Yeah, I love your tips there on the violations. Even some of those, I didn't really. I knew, I guess, but you don't think about very often when you talked about the agent who was kind of trying to accommodate people based on their needs or whatever she felt the challenges were, but obviously that being a violation based on fair housing. The leases we see a lot, the security deposit. That's a huge thing, especially in Chicago. That's a huge thing that really crushes most people to the point where I know that the Chicago Realtors Association has essentially said, we no longer recommend that you take a security deposit, do a move-in fee, but just avoid it altogether because too many people are getting crushed from the technicalities of those things. So definitely make sure that those things are tight. In regards to, I guess, these leases and understanding those nuances of every market, because it's tough if you live in one market to understand what lease you're supposed to use, what is a tight ironclad lease. Going back to Chicago Realtors, I know that they have a lease that they recommend. And I know when I was in Chicago, that was the lease we used. But, there's certainly a range of different leases and laws and, legislation from a local standpoint that may be different depending on the exact location. How does one navigate those challenges as a first-time landlord? Obviously Avail is one option, but what are the other ways that someone can actually go out there and figure out, do I have the right language in my lease or not?
Yeah, honestly, it's a huge problem because if you're a first-time landlord, you're unaware that there is an issue. So you don't even necessarily go out thinking, hey, I need to get a good lease. You just may not even think that bad leases exist. So it's an awareness problem to some extent. And so hard to solve. And a lot of the landlords do wind up making that mistake. They get sued and then like, oh yeah, I really did need a good lease. For most cities, the big thing to know is that the ordinance is going to overwrite anything in your lease. So if there's a discrepancy between your lease and the ordinance wins. Even though it's a legally binding contract, the ordinance just overrules it. So that's something to know. So even if you don't have the right lease, as a landlord, you should know the ordinances around your area, where your property is located, so that you understand what your rights are, what your tenants' rights are, and what your obligations are to them. That's important. And then as far as the rest of it, like what other options do landlords have? God, I wish there was more than, like Avail. You can use a property manager. And that's what a lot of landlords do. And it breaks my heart every time I see it because, you just bought your first property. You're excited. You might finally get some passive income, $100, $200 a month, and you're like, cool, this is going to be something. And then you pay a property manager a full month's rent to find your tenant. And you're like, oh, I thought I was going to make $200, but I just lost $800. And then you pay the property manager, 10% of the rent. So you might be paying them $100 to $200 a month to help you with the maintenance and collecting the rent. And now you're like, oh, I'm actually breaking even on this. And then you start rationalizing to yourself and you're like, well, at least I'm making appreciation on the property. And then you get your first maintenance issue and the property manager is like, hey, I got to do this maintenance. It's going to be $600. And you're like, oh, well, I guess I am losing money. So for those landlords, it's like, oh, God, they could have been in the black and had been making money if they didn't use the property manager. Because there's something about, it's your money, it's your property. You're going to treat it differently. Besides just the fees you're paying, that you think about a $1,000 rental, you're paying $1,000 to find a tenant, and you're going to pay $1,000 through the course of the year for those property management fees, $2,000, and you aren't even going to make that much on one unit. So if you can exclude that, the largest fee, which is that, then you have a chance. And no one's going to treat it as good as you are. And the amount of learning you're going to get when you manage your own is instrumental if you plan on growing this business. So it breaks my heart when I see people using property managers, because it means they're going to get out of the business sooner than they should, because there's just no way to make it work.
Yeah, what I'm hearing you say, and I've seen this as well. I mean, with the Chicago Multifamily Club in particular, where we talk to a lot of owners, especially 2 to 4 units. There's really 2 types of owners when it comes to these smaller properties. You have people who are hands-on, self-managing these assets, and then you have folks who are maybe working with a third-party management team. And those individuals, they really want the income. They want the passive income because they're busy professionals. They have other priorities that they want to spend their time doing. And maybe they're not as aware that there may be other opportunities or other ways to get the benefits without, essentially breaking even through this property manager or just making a small amount. But if you want to be hands-on, this sounds like a great approach. And I love the benefits that you gave. So certainly check out Avail. There are other solutions out there. I don't want this to be a promo, but I do think that there's a lot of opportunities for smaller owners to still be sophisticated in their approaches and their systems. I was reading something on Bigger Pockets just yesterday, actually, and this woman was talking about a resident she has and the challenges she's facing with them. And a lot of people run into these kind of issues once they get a tenant where they don't know what to do, how to navigate, all those different things when it comes to this. And if you have a large portfolio, you kind of have a property manager who can kind of help you navigate it. But I think that's one of the big things that prevents people from managing their own portfolio on a small scale is they're concerned on what happens if I do get that tenant, the one who's complaining, the one who wants things fixed, the one who is making this passive income deal, quite frankly, a nightmare. How do they manage that? So for you, and again, that is probably the biggest thing that concerns most new landlords. How do you help them? What are the questions you see? What are some of the solutions that they could be implementing to navigate those nightmare situations?
Yeah, certainly. Those nightmare situations can occur, and they do, but they're by no means the normal, I don't think. So I think a lot of it, I hope to dispel the fear that new landlords might have, because it's rare. And in fact, for me, now I've been a landlord 10 years. I've never once had a tenant call me at 3 a.m. with a problem. And the reason for it is because they're asleep. I'm asleep, they're asleep, everybody's asleep. So, but do they call me with problems? Sure, all the time. And those problems are always solvable. They're not massive. We once had the ceiling that we had, in Chicago, you got these flat roofs, and we had a huge snowstorm, and then it turned to ice, and then the ice started to melt, but only on the underside. And so it kind of just puddled up there and it leaked into the unit. So the tenant's like, hey, we got water flooding in. That's probably the worst encounter I've ever had. Luckily we had insurance. So insurance paid for it, but it's a kind of a logistics nightmare as a landlord. But those are rare, and those shouldn't try to turn people away from trying to think about financial independence or passive income. But you do have to plan for those. Go into the mindset like something like that could occur. Now, that's not even necessarily about nightmare tenants yet, so I want to talk about that too. But the big thing is I don't want people to be dissuaded from trying to figure out a financial independence dream. I think they should still be thinking about that. As far as nightmare tenants, I think nightmare tenants come more around when you have a nightmare landlord. If you treat tenants poorly, they're going to treat you poorly. I think that's just a natural thing that's going to happen. And treating them fair, they're going to treat you fair. If you're worried about it, certainly I think there's some upfront work you can do to remove some of that risk. So make sure where you're putting your listing is reaching a wider audience so that you have a good selection of tenants to look at. From there, make sure that you're setting expectations and communicating properly. Let them know you're going to do a background check, credit check, criminal check. I think a lot of it's about communication. Where it starts to turn sour is when you haven't been communicating and then all of a sudden they're blindsided by a $55 rental application and like, what is this? Take the time to walk through the lease with them. So even in today's age now where everything is moving to be online or contactless, like our whole process is contactless, but that doesn't mean you should remove the human element. Even if you do it through Zoom, you should kind of walk them through the lease, explain what each clause means, why it's important, why it's there, let them know their rights. And I think if you do that, you are by far removing some of that risk. If it's a bad tenant, they're going to kind of opt out because they're going to see that you take it seriously in a way. And if they would have been on the fence, they're now no longer on the fence. They're going to be cooperative because you've been cooperative. That's how I would solve that issue.
Man, I love that. You just gave some really great actionable items. And the quote you just gave, nightmare tenants are usually a result of a nightmare landlord. We got to take accountability. I'm putting myself in there just to say as landlords and property owners, we have to take accountability of the power we have to screen properly and to attract the kind of clients. You talked about the customers before. We've got to attract the kind of customers we want. And there are a couple ways we can do that. You mentioned 3 specific ones. 1, communication. Set expectations up front of what your expectations are. 2, make sure you screen properly, do your background checks, and make sure you have a clear understanding of the type of person you're going to be entering into an agreement with. And then the 3rd is communicating the lease details. Go through those clauses, make sure they're clear, they understand what they are, they understand that you are going to enforce any rules that are put in there, any late payment penalties, any pet rules, anything like that you are going to enforce it, and make sure they're clear, they understand it. And that's going to make it an entirely professional situation where they're going to respect you. They're going to, act with, more accordance to everything that you're working on versus, somebody who is just going to wait for you to turn and see what they could get away with. So being clear, communicating, even in this digital age, even with all the technological advances we have, it's still great to make sure we walk through it and talk to our residents. Laurence, this has been great.
Sorry, I'll just add one more thing. I mean, tenants want to do the right thing. They want to pay their rents on time. They want to take care of the property. Obviously you have the pandemic that's occurring now, and landlords were fearful that tenants aren't going to pay their rent, even if they could afford to. Like they may use it as an excuse. And we see all the rent data coming through our system. And you would see on the news and the media, where it's like, oh, you know what, 50% of rent isn't going to be paid. And we would see that with our tenants too. A lot of them became unemployed due to the pandemic. And when you look at the rent data, 90+% of it was paid, and way more than what anybody had forecasted. They want to pay rent. They want to be responsible adults.
No, I love it. Laurence, this has been really good so far. Are you ready for our bullseye round?
Sure. Yeah.
Give me a failure or an apparent failure that sets you up for later success.
Yeah. When we started building Avail, we followed like the lean startup methodology, all of this, I don't want to call it propaganda, but all of this stuff where they talk about build a minimum viable product, get something out as quickly as possible. And what I think no one talked about at that time was building a minimal viable audience, which would be, in my opinion, the counterpoint. I got this product, but where's the audience? And we didn't do that. And I think that set us back a lot. But now, whenever we think about a new feature or something else that we're going to launch, we're always talking about who's the audience for this before we even do anything. And I think that has helped us become very successful with anything else we launch now. Huge failure though when we got started.
I really love that concept. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the minimum viable audience?
Yeah, I'll start with the minimum viable product, right? The idea there is when you're launching a business and it's product-based, web-based, you don't want to spend years and years trying to develop the perfect product. You just want to get something out there as quickly as possible to start iterating on it and getting real feedback. That's known as building the minimum viable product. The smallest thing that's going to give someone value that you can start updating and iterating on. So the idea there is a lot of people don't want to release something until it's perfect, and that's too late because you'll never release it. The counterpoint to that being minimum viable audience, right? You have to have this minimum audience that you want to sell to in multiple ways. So one, when you're building that product, you might want to start thinking about what kind of email newsletter can I have that is going to be talking about this product and building that audience and keeping them excited. Or where can I go to meet and talk with people who would be interested in this product down the road and start networking and understanding them before I build anything. Or how can I start to get them to think about what we're building at Avail, even though Avail doesn't exist yet? How can I pull them in, include them? And so typical things you do, there's like email marketing. You might have a splash page where people come in. You might start doing content before you even have a product. You might, there's a bunch of different things in there, but you want to have an audience in mind and a set of people that you can constantly communicate with.
No, I love it. Thank you for clarifying that. Give me a digital or mobile resource you recommend for your business.
I'm sorry, you cut out for a second there.
Give me a digital or mobile resource you recommend for your business.
Yeah, for Avail or for landlording?
Either way.
Cool.
Landlording is probably more, I guess, applicable for our audience. Let's say landlording.
Sure. So for landlording, well, besides the one that we have, obviously, for me, we use a lot of like Google products to help us with the business. I don't want to give tenants my real phone number, even though there's a lot of trust that I build with them. They'll move out, or a lot of applicants won't ever have moved in and you don't know who they are. So I don't want to give my real phone number. So we use Google. I personally use Google Voice a lot for my rentals to keep that protected. And then as part of that, there's a broader G Suite. So, I create an official email. Ours is office@3J Rentals. And it gives you a sense of professionalism when you're approaching things. And when you come as a professional, then you get treated back as a professional. And just having some sort of business suite like that is key. And it's cheap. I think like $3 a month or something like that, $5 a month.
Give me the book you've recommended or gifted the most in the last year.
Yeah, well, I've recommended, this is a really old book, so I'll mention it quickly and then go on to a different one. Rich Dad Poor Dad, honestly, is what set me up to be a landlord. You go, classic book. Obviously, you look back on it now and you're like, he was just doing that to make money and scheme off of you. But the advice in it is still good. Think about yourself going through these quadrants of life as an employee to passive income to business owner, and try to work your way through these quadrants and think about things in that way. Think about an asset as something that puts money in your pocket, and a liability is something that takes money out of your pocket. When you start thinking about that, it changes your mentality. Like a car is not an asset. A house that you live in is not an asset because it's not bringing money into your pocket. Even a rental property, if the expenses are more than the income, it's not an asset. And so you should think about it that way. But the book this year that I've been recommending a lot, at Avail, last year we implemented a new kind of goal setting strategy called OKRs. It's been around for 50 years. I think developed by someone at Intel. It's called, so the book is called Measure What Matters. And you essentially create these goals and how you want to measure them with clearly defined KPIs built into it. And for us, when we heard it, it was like, wow, we really could use this. It was revolutionary. So if you're someone who likes to set goals and you want a framework that's really going to help you do it, the OKR framework is great. And then the book Measure What Matters walks you through it every step of the way.
Give me a daily habit that helps you stay focused on your goals.
Yeah, this is simple. I write a to-do list either the night before or first thing in the morning. I do it on my iPad and I'll just write the list. And I won't start my day until I write the list. And I won't end my day until I've knocked everything off the list. And just creating the list helps you stay focused. And honestly, scratching things off gives you so much of those endorphins and good feeling that you feel accomplished and you sleep well that night.
What's one thing you know now that you wish you knew when you were starting out?
Yeah, well, with rental properties, I wish I knew more about deferred maintenance before I bought the first one. I didn't think about it so much, but there was a lot of deferred maintenance. With Avail, I wish I knew how hard this was going to be. We're working on 7+ years. I think we've had really good growth. We've got a good 24-person team, but it's not overnight. Everyone thinks Facebook was overnight. That took 15, 20 years. A lot of people think it's overnight. It's not. It's a slog to try to build something from nothing. And I wish I'd appreciated that more before I got started. Not that I wouldn't have done it, but I think I may have done it differently, or maybe saw a mentor earlier.
What are you curious about right now?
Oh man. From a personal standpoint, I'm really excited by some of the things that SpaceX is doing. So curiosity there. I don't know if it makes sense to have people be on Mars. I don't know, but I'm curious about it. I like watching it. We obviously just reinvigorated the space program recently, which is super exciting. And I know there's a lot of there's some controversy, right? Should we be spending money on that when there's a lot of stuff here that we can fix and do? But I think you have to have a balance of fixing things here and creating hope for the future in a way. And so I'm curious about what might come out of that.
All right, you're in Chicago, great city, great food town. Give me the best place to grab a bite.
Okay. Well, I always recommend Chicago Pizza and Oven Grinder. To me, probably you think of Chicago as deep dish pizza. This is a place in Lincoln Park area of Chicago. They bring you out a pizza pie. It's literally a pie. Think of like a chicken pot pie. So they bring out a pizza and they flip it upside down, and you have like a pie crust on the top and inside. It feels like a pie. People say pizza pie, but this feels like a pie, and it's awesome. It's wonderful. They have a really nice Mediterranean bread as well and a salad. It's cash only though. So, and the line can be like 2 hours.
All right, we'll have to check that out. I don't think I've been there or heard of that one. So, and it's called the Chicago Pizza Grinder. Is that what you said?
Chicago Pizza and Oven Grinder. You can tell at some point, maybe 20, 30, 40 years ago, maybe even still today, who knows, that it was run by the mafia or something. It's dimly lit. It's dark. You have to step down into it, cash only. You could tell that there may have been some nefarious stuff at one point.
Maybe we'll leave it at that. Well, listen, Laurence, a lot of great information today. I really appreciate you sharing so much. Just to recap a couple of high level things. One, leaving your corporate job in 2012 to launch Avail, trying to solve a problem for smaller time landlords, and just giving them the technology and the systems that they need to be an effective landlord, making sure that they cut down some of their learning curve, and then creating educational content that can help you grow from a marketing standpoint, the way you tapped into inbound marketing to grow your user base and just continue to evolve the business, being very efficient and kind of making sure that you were able to have some longevity versus so many other people in the tech space. So I really appreciate you sharing that, as well as some of the challenges that a lot of landlords are facing, whether it be with, the security deposit or the leases or, unknowingly having some violations, but just really understanding some of those challenges. And that quote you gave, that nightmare tenants usually come from nightmare landlords. Very powerful thing that I think can stick with us and just make sure we are not passing the buck or the blame on our customers, but we're retaining accountability and doing everything we can to be the best business owners, the best property owners that we can be. Laurence, for our listeners who want to get in touch with you, learn a little bit more about you, or maybe even learn a little bit more about Avail, what is the best way to reach out?
Sure. I mean, they can come straight to our website. In fact, our service is free. I don't know. I should probably mention that. It's avail.co.
Man, what a, yeah, you might have wanted to mention that a little earlier, but sure, go ahead.
Yeah. So avail.co, avail.co. And we actually have a tenant screening guide, a book that they can download that's free. So if they go to avail.co/book, they'll be able to download that guide. And at least if they're new, they can get started on that process.
So if it's free, I assume you must take a fee somewhere in the process. Otherwise, you would still be living off ramen.
Yeah. Well, we are kind of still living off ramen in a way. But yeah, there are revenue streams that we have. So we do charge for the credit report that we pull. And then there are some services that are premium. So if a landlord wants to have automatic late fees, for instance, so 5th of the month rent isn't paid, auto charge of $25. Just so they don't have to log in, then they would upgrade for small little features like that.
Got it. Appreciate it. Well, listen, I really did appreciate our conversation. Thank you again for coming on the show. And from one guy who lives in Chicago, from another guy who was there for the last 8 years, stay safe out there, and I look forward to seeing you. And hopefully we can meet all again soon next time I'm up in Chicago. But you take care, okay? Thanks for coming on.
Great. Thank you so much.